Husband's been secretly living a double life, spending weekends in a different town with another woman, and I didn't find out because of lipstick on a collar or a neighbor's whisper. I found out because a pot hose cutting rooted in a glass I didn't recognize, and that's probably the most on-brand way for me to introduce myself. I'm Ray, I'm 31. And I'm a floral designer who runs a tiny shop wedged between a locksmith and a bakery that takes itself too seriously, which means my eyes know the difference between a plant that's been loved and one that's been staged. And the day I saw that cutting in our kitchen, bright new roots like little punctuation marks, I knew on a level under language that something was growing where I hadn't planted it. The cutting sat in a recycled jam jar with a piece of twine tied around the lip, a bow I would never tie because I don't do bows unless a bride brandishes Pinterest with tears. It was the kind of jar our landlord buys because she thinks emptiness wants a purpose. I stood there in our small sunstruck kitchen with my hand on the counter like I might tip sideways and thought, whose hands put that there? My husband, Marcus, can barely keep a succulent alive. He names them and forgets them in the same week. He calls plants the green guys like they're a sports team. I should tell you about Marcus before your imagination makes him a cartoon. He's 34, a paramedic, good under pressure, better at the dumb jokes that keep people from collapsing while the worst afternoon of their life gets addressed by strangers. He is the kind of man who keeps granola bars in the glove box and stops for stray dogs. We've been married 4 years, which means the towels are finally the right softness and the spoons are slowly migrating to the drawer where they actually belong. He works long shifts, and lately he'd taken overtime on weekends, the kind that leave him Sunday evenings sagged on the couch with that hollowed-out hero calm. "Who brought you that?" I asked, nodding at the jar like it might answer. He looked up from his cereal, surprised. "Oh, Mrs. Gutierrez? She's the one who told me cuttings root better in glass." He said it like a question. He added milk to cereal that already had milk, and I watched the bowl flood in slow motion, and it was so absurdly on the nose that if it had been a scene in a movie I would have rolled my eyes. Mrs. Gutierrez is 82 and lives 2 doors down, and her idea of mischief is feeding squirrels unsalted peanuts against the posted signs. She does not tie twine bows. I put the cutting on the window ledge in the only sliver of late afternoon sun we get from the alley and went to work, an ordinary Monday with hands in buckets, eucalyptus oil under my nails, and my phone stuffed into my back pocket playing a playlist of songs that sound like someone wrote them on a porch in July. A bride came in wanting undone arrangements, which is the floral equivalent of "I woke up like this" and takes 4 hours of wizardry. I trimmed ranunculus and forced roses to open with a hairdryer and tried very hard not to think about jars. It would have slipped by, truly it would have, if not for the receipts people leave themselves like breadcrumbs. I packed orders, wrote cards in my neat little hand, "You are my favorite place," and at closing I opened the register drawer and there was a gas receipt for a town I don't drive to, stuffed under the 20s like a rabbit in a hat. Not my car. Not my route. A town an hour and a half away, more if you pretend you're not hurrying. The timestamp was Saturday at 7:41 a.m. He'd said his unit got called for training all day. He'd texted me at noon a photo of a burrito and a cone of orange safety tape and a joke about how you never forget your first love. The receipt had a note at the bottom. Marcus always uses Apple Pay, but this was cash, and the cashier had written a smiley next to his name like he'd said something funny or tender or just took the time you take with a person you'll never see again. The smiley felt like a door opening onto a hallway I didn't know existed. I put the receipt back where I found it because I needed to live in my life for another night before I invited in a new one. I went home and made pasta and pretended my head wasn't a theater. I watched Marcus watch a game and laughed at parts one didn't hear, and then, after dishes and the domestic choreography we do when our hands know the steps better than our heads do, I said casual as weather, "How was the training Saturday?" He passed me a towel. "Boring," he said. "Too many lectures, not enough hands-on." He dried a plate like a person who has decided to be trustworthy about dishes. "We might have another one next week," he added. There are 2 kinds of lies, the ones that are trying on outfits and the ones ready for public office. I couldn't tell which one I'd been handed. I'm the kind of person who hates ambiguity like a splinter. So I took a deep breath and did the thing 100 rom-coms have trained us never to do because the plot requires you to be an idiot, I asked. "And the gas station in Auburn Falls? Good burritos." I said it like a joke. It wasn't. His face performed a small theater, confusion, recalculation, the instinct to be charming the moment it fails. We stopped for gas, he said. We carpooled. He dried the same plate again. Why cash? I asked. The machine was down, he said. Weird weekend. I looked at his hands, these hands that hold strangers' hearts steady, calloused in two places from gurneys and guitar. I did not say what my body wanted to say, which was all caps in a language not fit for plants. I went to water the pot hose cutting and found that I had to pretend it wasn't beautiful. The next weekend he left early. The jar in the sink was rinsed and turned upside down to dry. The pot hose leaves had turned toward the window in the night. I told myself 3 things. You do not know what you do not know, you are good at asking questions people can answer, and your life will not become a courtroom if you do not make it one. Then I did a small unkind thing, I followed him. I told myself I was going to the farmer's market in a neighboring town for peonies. I told myself a lot of things. I took the back roads because he would take the highway, he always chases speed like a Labrador. I caught him 2 towns over at a turn signal, his truck familiar and sun-faded, the air freshener hanging from his rear view in the shape of a little pine tree that's been dead since October. He turned right where our lives have never needed a right. I turned too. 37 minutes later we drove into a town that looked borrowed from a postcard, brick storefronts, a diner with a neon pie sign, children playing hopscotch like it hadn't been invented for a film. He parked in front of a building with upstairs windows and a door framed in geraniums planted so tightly it looked like someone who understood abundance lived there. A woman opened the door. She was my height, maybe younger by a year, hair up in a knot that said this is not the first time I've made a room happen. She wore a t-shirt soft with history and jeans that had seen better paint days, and she smiled in a way that included him in a past I wasn't part of. He stepped into the doorway and did the kind of hug you save for a person whose smell you already know. Not a lean, not a peck, a full-body I am home hug, the kind I give my sister at the airport and the kind he gives me when he comes off a long shift and I meet him on the sidewalk because our front steps know how to hold the weight of a day. His hand found the back of her head like a compass. My stomach felt like a stage trapdoor opening under my feet. I did not burst in. I have flower buckets in the back of my car. I sat behind a hydrangea and watched the person I had built a bed with disappear into a doorway that wasn't ours, and I put my hand on the steering wheel so I wouldn't put it through the window that had made itself available to be broken. After a while, 10 minutes, 100 years, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. How's the market? Get anything pretty? I stared at the words until they lost shape. Then I texted back. Peonies are out of season, but I found something. I almost sent a photo of my own furious face. I didn't. I drove home the long way so I wouldn't have to face the pot hose cutting like a witness. If you're waiting for the part where I confront him with the most effective dramatic timing, door opens, wife on couch, receipts pinned to a corkboard, you'll be disappointed. I did inventory of my heart. I called my best friend Jules, who is a high school physics teacher and believes in the honesty of gravity, and I told her, in a voice that sounded like it was trying to fit itself back into my mouth, what I'd seen. She said very gently, "Do you want to be right or do you want to learn?" I said, "Both in that order." She laughed, that laugh that has saved me from running into fires before, and said, "Ask him to describe his weekend using nouns." It sounded stupid. It turned out to be holy. He came home Sunday night with that emptied-out hero calm, and before he could lay the stories down like towels, I said, "I followed you." This is not the advice column version, I know. But I know my nerves, they don't hold secrets well. He didn't blow up. He closed the refrigerator like it was porcelain and leaned his hip against the counter. "Okay," he said, and the air shifted from scripted to true. "Okay." "Who is she?" I asked, and he said her name the way you inhale before you dive, Lena. He said it without flinching, which I appreciated and hated. "And what is that place?" I asked. "Her apartment," he said. "Her life." His face did not turn into a villain. He looked like my husband, but tired in the way people look when they stop holding a wall up that has already fallen. "I'm seeing her," he said, and the sentence was so simple it nearly cured me of adjectives. "On weekends," I said, because I needed to hear him make it concrete. On weekends, he said. For how long? 8 months, he said, and my chest did that thing where you feel the math before you hear it. I am not here to narrate a righteous rage scene. I did not throw plates. I asked a question I wish I had asked the pot hose cutting the second I saw it. What did you build there that you couldn't build here? He closed his eyes and opened them slowly like honesty stings. Quiet, he said first, and then, a version of me that isn't dying every day by 1,000 kindnesses. I could have murdered him for that sentence. I also knew what he meant. We had become good roommates. We had become the people who leave notes about the recycling schedule and remember to pick up the soap refills and forget to touch each other's faces. We don't have kids, I said, as if that made us immune from ordinary adult amnesia. We're not drowning in dishes. He looked at me as if I'd called the weather a villain. It wasn't about workload, he said. It was about being new. At Lena's, I'm just a man who brings oranges and fixes a wobbly table and sleeps until 9. And here? I asked, venom like honey on my tongue. Here I'm hero and husband and the guy who knows which neighbor has the spare key and the one who keeps a smile on so you don't have to worry about sirens. He was not wrong. He was also not allowed to use that truth as a passport. Did you plan to leave me? I asked, because that's the ruin in the closet I couldn't keep from opening. He stared at the cutting on the sill like it was a parable and then at me like I was the one person alive he owed a real sentence to. I was planning to, he said, and the past progressive tense shaved a layer off my bones. Not because I don't love you, he added quickly, and I held up a hand because I didn't want to be consoled using a word I still loved too. Because I didn't know how to end something without bleeding out. Because it felt easier to start another life and then jump. There's a version of this story where I throw him out that minute and erase our names from the wedding china with steel wool. There's another where I say we'll work through this and we both pretend it's not the work of lifting a house. Neither happened. What happened is I became very, very boring and very, very clear. Pack a bag, I said. Go to a hotel. Text her that you won't be coming on weekends. Tell her I exist as a person and not a secret. Do not manage her feelings. Then you and I will sit down with a calendar and either dismantle this kindly like adults or make rules and find out if we're the kind of people who can live with them. He nodded like a man who found the floor. He packed. He texted while I watched him, not because I wanted to be his parole officer but because witness is sometimes the only way to be kind to yourself. I've been lying, he wrote to Lena. I am married and my wife knows. I won't be coming this weekend or any weekend. I'm choosing my marriage if it can be repaired. I'm sorry for what I made you. He pressed send and then covered his face and wept the silliest, ugliest, babyish tears and I stood there and did not rub his back even though my hands know that move by heart. He left. The door was gentle. It hurt anyway. I slept on the couch like people do when they can't share a bed with their own thoughts. In the morning my phone had a message from an unknown number. I didn't know, it said. I thought he was divorcing. I said I didn't want to be the reason. I guess I was anyway. No name, no punctuation except the kind that knows where to stop. I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then I wrote back, thank you for writing. Please don't contact me again. I don't know if that was mature or petty or both. I know it kept me from becoming a villain in a story where there didn't need to be one more. We went to therapy with a woman named Fran who had a shelf full of rocks which I thought was corny until she handed me one and said, hold on to something while you tell the truth, and I realized my hands needed a job. She didn't ask him why he cheated, not right away. She asked, when did you stop bringing your weekends home? He said, when my weekends started to look like a recovery ward. And he meant the way he slept through Saturday mornings and I let him, as if rest were a private property. She asked me, when did you stop being a place he could be new, and I said, when the shop started to make me mother everything I touched. We did not become saints in an hour. We became people with a schedule. No weekends away and less together. No secrets. He calls me on his breaks and says something more interesting than busy. I text him photos of the shop when it's dark and beautiful and empty because he confessed once that the emptiness scares him, and I decided to be the kind of wife who teaches emptiness to behave. He gave me the passwords not because I asked, but because he couldn't stand living in the house of maybe. I barely use them. I keep them like a fire extinguisher. We also did something so stupid it saved us. We made Sunday sacred in the dumbest possible way. We go to the farmer's market for produce we could buy cheaper at the grocery store, and we hold peaches up to the light and argue about which tomatoes are exhibitionists, and we walk past the stand that sells cuttings and I say no and he says please, and I say if you promise to water it, and he says I will, and sometimes he does and sometimes I do, and the point is not botany. It's that we built a new porch and put a chair on it and both our names on the mail. But this isn't a montage. 2 months after the day I followed him, a Saturday rolled around and I woke to the sound of him breathing like a man planning something, and I said, eyes still closed, "Tell me if your body wants the other town," and he said so quietly I almost had to become heir to hear it, "Yes." I sat up. "Okay," I said. "Do you want to go there or do you want to build that here?" He cried again, smaller, like raindrops on a window. "Here," he said. So we made pancakes and ate them standing up and then had sex like people who are trying to forget and ended up remembering, and later we walked to the diner with the neon pie and told our waitress we were celebrating something we couldn't explain. I saw Lena once. The town is not a galaxy away and grief doesn't respect jurisdiction. I was dropping off wedding centerpieces at a hall with exactly 2 working outlets and 7 aunties in charge when she walked in carrying a garment bag for someone. She saw me, I saw her. We did not make a scene because some of us get to grow up. She gave me a small nod and I returned it, and that was the whole exchange. 2 women in a doorway, both refusing to be the last sentence of a man's story. You want to know if I forgave him? Forgiveness is not a door, it's a dimmer switch, and most days it's turned to possible. Sometimes I still feel rage like a visiting relative who overstays. Sometimes I feel a softness so large it scares me. He asks for my hand now like it's a language he's relearning. I give it when I can. When I can't, I put both of mine in a bucket of cold water at the shop and remind myself I have built beauty out of worse tangles than this. The pot hose cutting outgrew its jar. I repotted it in a terracotta I bought from a kid selling old pots on his stoop with a sign that said "Pay what your heart says." I tied the same twine around the rim, not because I'm sentimental about the lie but because the bow looks like a scar and I've decided scars are just names for places that learned. It sits in the window like a green sentence we keep writing. He waters it on Tuesdays. I do Thursdays. If a leaf yellows, we snip it and don't pretend it was always meant to be. Sometimes late he asks me to tell him the worst part and I say the jar and he says me too, and we laugh because it's so tiny and so accurate. Sometimes I wake on a Saturday and is staring at the ceiling and I ask, "Where are you?" and he says here, and he is. Sometimes we drive to that postcard town together and walk past the doorway and keep walking, not out of punishment but because moving forward is not a metaphor, it's muscles and feet. We buy pie. We eat it on a bench. We are ridiculous. We are trying. If you ask me for advice, I don't have it. I have inventory. I have lists. I have a shop that smells like rain even when it hasn't. I have a husband whose hand knows the back of my head like a compass and a map of mistakes we rolled up and stuck behind the couch. I have Saturdays that are ours by contract and by desire, and Sundays with peaches, and a plant that refuses to die even when we forget how much water it wanted. I have a story that didn't end when the credits were convenient. He used to spend weekends in a different town. Now he spends them learning the terrain of our house again, which floorboard complains, which mug I pretend not to like and always choose, the time of day the window makes a square on the wall like a portal, and sometimes we stand in it together, hands grazing, while the light passes over our faces and makes us look like new people who might be worth starting over with in place. And when the light moves on and the room becomes what it always was, ordinary, a little dusty, we keep standing there for a minute longer than necessary because for now, still amazingly, it feels like the right town to be in.